Hello, my name is Joel Vos, and I will be giving this presentation about how to deal with narcissists and their gaslighting. I will start with a small disclaimer. I'm not an expert on narcissists and their gaslighting, but I've become like a coincidental expert on this. In my daily life, I'm a psychotherapist and I'm a researcher at the Metanoia Institute in London, and I'm also the chair of the IMEC International Meeting Events and Community. In that capacity, I know a lot about different psychotherapy aspects and also about personality disorders. However, I've never really specialized in narcissists. Until, unfortunately, I've come across several narcissists in my own life. And so I had to sort out for myself how to deal with them. So in this presentation, I will be sharing with you my personal experiences about how to deal with narcissists and with their gaslighting. And I will possibly give some examples to also show how confusing it can be to deal with narcissists. In this presentation, I will give several resources that you may want to look at yourself, such as several books and several other resources like videos where you can find some more help for yourself. These are mainly some examples or resources that I found helpful myself to learn more about narcissists. And obviously, as a psychotherapist and as a researcher and lecturer on psychotherapies, I think that I may have some ideas about which types of resources can be helpful and which seem to be slightly less helpful. But of course, this is all your own journey, and you'll need to find your way of dealing with narcissists and their gaslighting, and you'll need to find out for yourself what works for you. So in this presentation, I will talk about the different types of narcissism, about relational games that they may be playing, the gaslighting, and our emotional responses to that. And I will also talk about the human magnet syndrome. And that means very much how some individuals may have to experience that they attract a lot of narcissists in their life, or that they are pulled by narcissists, so that they often get entangled in narcissistic games. I will also speak about how narcissism is a trait that seems to be stimulated in our society, and also how this may be relevant in certain cults, such as in several fundamentalist religions and political groups, also at universities, university degrees, certain popular researchers or therapists even, but also in particular political activism movements. I'll give some examples of that. And then in the final bits of my presentation, I will talk about how can we deal with narcissists and how can we heal from them and possibly leave them. But again, this will be very much about your own journey, finding out for yourself what works for you, and also see how does this apply to you. There may be certain aspects that may not apply, some bits may apply. Well, I hope that this can be a source of inspiration for yourself. I can tell you that I found it very helpful when I learned myself mainly to identify what was going on in my life with several narcissists in my own life. I've learned a lot from that. And just by hearing some people talk about that in presentations like this. So that's my own personal aim of giving this presentation, that I hope to share some of the inspiration that has, and some of the help that has inspired and helped myself. So let's crack on with the topic of the different types of narcissism. So first of all, we need to say that narcissistic disorders, they are like a full family. And according to the psychiatric diagnostic manual, the DSM, the different types of personality disorders, which all seem to have some aspect of narcissism in it. Of course, there's a narcissistic personality disorder, there's borderline, and there's also antisocial personality disorder, which were in the past called psychopaths and sociopaths. However, we also see that narcissistic issues can be a part of many different disorders or problems. And I personally would say that a lot of those disorders actually are also the result from individuals having been through some traumatic life experiences themselves, and also some dysregulated attachment. So I mean that they didn't develop that kind of secure attachment in their early life due to not having had the sensitive and responsive parents that all of us deserve. So a lot of the narcissistic issues seem to stem from some early life experiences, which can then later lead to those narcissistic problems. But there may be other types of traumas and traumatic disorders where narcissism can almost become a kind of response to that early hurt in people's lives. However, in this presentation, I will not be talking so much about why people develop narcissistic personality disorders. I'm sure that there are some psychotherapists and researchers who have written several books about that or presentations about it, and you should be able to find those online as well. So I can highly recommend this book about disarming the narcissist from Wendy Behary. I think this is one of the best books that I've read on the topic. It helps you to identify what narcissism is about, but also to see your own role in that. Or I mean, mainly like which type of impact do they have on your life and how can you get out of that? So Behary uses this overview of the different, let's call it kind of indications that you may have to deal with a narcissist in your life. So a narcissist is a person who is strongly self-absorbed. So they act as if everything is about him or her. They feel very entitled. So they make the rules and they break the rules. They're demeaning, so it means that they put you down or bully you. And they also have a lot of demands about whatever they want. They can also be distrustful. So they can be suspicious of you and your motives, particularly when you try to be nice to them. They can also be quite perfectionistic, possibly because they have very high standards and things must be done precisely their way. They can also be quite snobbish, where they show some superiority, and they get bored very easily with, for instance, listening to other people. They are seeking for approval, so they crave constant praise and recognition. Often this is done in such a way that it almost looks as if you are giving them spontaneous approval, but actually they've set you up and they've pushed you into such a situation that you will give them that approval. They're often quite unempathic, so they may be very sociable, they may have all the social skills, they may understand what's going on inside you, but they're simply not interested in understanding your inner experiences and doing something with that. So that's important to also differentiate, like narcissism, for instance, from other disorders or issues, such as people who are on the autistic spectrum. Because, for instance, autism is not so much about lack of empathy, because it's more about lack of understanding others. So autistic people find it very difficult to understand other people, and they don't have a so-called theory of mind. Whereas narcissistic people, they can have the theory of mind. They are able to understand our minds of other people. They may understand a little bit what's going on inside others, but they decide to ignore that, or they decide to use that in their own advantage. So in narcissists, it's often like an unwillingness of being empathic. Whereas, for instance, in other disorders or issues such as autism, it's more about the inability to be empathic and cope with that. So to come back to the narcissistic people, is they often cannot offer like a genuine apology. They can also be very compulsive, so they can get consumed in details. They can also be addicted, so they cannot let go of bad habits, which they may use to self-soothe. So often we see people get addicted to alcohol or drugs, or even like things like partying, or they can be addicted to love. Or sex or spending. They can also seem quite emotionally detached, particularly when it's about more difficult feelings or when it involves intimacy and coming very close to them. So there are different types of narcissists, and I really like how Behary is making differentiation between the spoiled dependent people and the deprived narcissists. And those different types are caused by the different origins of why people develop a narcissistic disorder. It's like when you've been spoiled, you'll develop a different type of narcissism than when you have grown up in a very dependent way or when you've been very lonely. There are a lot of researchers who have developed many different typologies of narcissism, and I personally think that we need to have more research on that. But that's a rule of thumb for the time being. I think that those two are two that I often recognize, and this may be helpful for yourself as well. So the spoiled dependent narcissist, they speak as if he or she is superior to others. That can be in terms of looks, intelligence, accomplishments, or in any other ways. They also expect special attention from almost everyone, and they act as if the rules do not apply to them. They interrupt others when they're speaking because they assume that they're more important. They can have some temper tantrums, or they can avoid when things don't go their way. They can speak in very long-winded monologues and views themselves as an expert on everything. So it's important to make a differentiation between recognizing real experts and for instance, a narcissist, because a real expert may seem a bit narcissistic or seem to be boasting on their own academic achievements, for instance. But they would immediately not be boasting about their achievements in other areas of their life. So this is the big difference, where for actually that narcissists will show that idea of being an expert in all fields, and they will never have a debate. They will never give full evidence for actually everything that they're claiming. Whereas like a proper real expert will give the references and the evidence, and they will also say what they do not know. They will say where they feel that their ideas are limited. In a similar way as I started this conversation or this presentation by saying that I'm not necessarily like an expert, like a researcher on this topic, but a lot of it in this presentation is about sharing what I've discovered can be helpful also in my own personal journey. So that's an example of where I'm not narcissistic in that sense. So the deprived child narcissist is a person who is constantly fishing for compliments, recognition, and favors. And you can see that they feel insecure or inadequate underneath all the appearance of a sturdy facade. And so you will hear things like, so you really liked what I did, didn't you? Or something like, looks good on me, don't you think? So they also demand explanations or clarifications just to soothe them and just to be sure that others are not there to hurt, humiliate them or take advantage of them. So they will ask you things like, what exactly are you saying about me? Are you calling me a liar? Things like that. So they turn on you or they hide when they feel frustrated or hurt. They also feel entitled to protect their ego through attack, distraction, or consumption with things like, how dare you? I'll show you. So quite often they work excessively, they can overeat and things like that, get quite addicted, and particularly when they feel hurt. They can deny, defend, and demean you, the victim, and particularly when they have the idea that you may be betraying them, such as sexually acting out, betraying you with a different partner, for instance, even dangerous spending habits, legal infractions, gaslighting. I'll say more about that later. So again, these are just two types and many other types of narcissists, and you'll be able to find a lot of that online in a lot of the different lectures or different books on the different types of narcissists. But I personally find those two that the most helpful. So in this presentation, I'll mainly help you to identify kind of which type of symptoms may actually be attributed to a kind of narcissism, and then you can possibly develop your own type of narcissistic diagnosis. A very important differentiation is between overt narcissism and covert narcissism. And Debbie Mirza has written a very good book about the covert passive-aggressive narcissists. A lot of people find this a very helpful book. Since publication of the book, there have been many more studies on differentiation between covert and overt narcissism. I'll first tell a bit more when narcissism is overt and then about when it's covert. So overt narcissism means that it's obvious, it's clear, and you can almost immediately see it. And as one of my professors during my own study was saying, this is the kind of narcissism that you can see in the front garden. Whereas like covert narcissism is more hidden, and that is almost like in the back garden. Only when you get to know a person better, then you start to identify, well, actually, this is narcissism. But anyhow, first the overt narcissists. They like to be the center of the attention, so they're very big in the room, they're extrovert, loud, sociable. They can be like the party organizer, telling big stories. They like to associate themselves with others who are very famous or have a lot of glory. They can exaggerate and focus on the uniqueness. For instance, like I had a friend who was very narcissistic, and I'll be referring to him several times in this presentation. I'll call him Clark. And he was very often saying, well, this is a unique one-time event. You need to come. This will never happen again in history. Whereas only later I started to realize, well, that was not so unique. It was just a drink up together with some friends, and we do that each week. But I believe that kind of uniqueness that he was creating there. And very often they will not hear when anyone criticizes them. They simply do not listen. Often they overtly boost the ego by putting themselves up, for instance, by manipulating others to give them praise or status, but also via creating a sense of control by explicitly shaming you and explicitly dominating others. So this very often by, for instance, telling all the big stories, how fantastic they are, and telling what a fantastic event it is. They will be saying that thousands of times when you have a simple drink up, and they will be telling, oh, this is so amazing, don't you think so? It's the best event ever. And then you are expected to say, yes, this is an amazing event. I will never forget this. This is life-changing. And thank you for organizing this. You're such a great organizer. And it's so great that you've been able to get all those famous people here at your party. That's what I want to hear. They set you up to boost their ego. So they put their ego up and they pull you in that you will further put them up. Like all the narcissists have a clear lack of empathy for others, where they do not want to look after the needs of others. And often they are obsessed with fantasies about personal success and not necessarily about the success of a shared goal, such as the success of a community. So, for example, I've also been involved in several activist movements in some political actions. And that group is led by some narcissists. And it's very interesting how they're more interested in building the big movement. And they're all the time talking about how many people should be involved in a movement. And they're not really talking about the actual success. When I ask them, okay, it's great that we have a big movement, but how do we really create a change in society that we want to see? Well, that's not relevant. And also in all the strategy documents, they're only talking about the success of the movement. And the success is only measured by how much attention do they get from the public? How much do the media give attention to them? So it's not about real change or a shared goal or making a real change in the world. It's about a personal success. And that, of course, can be very detrimental in like a cult, like certain political actions where they take advantage of other activist volunteers. So often they are very emotionally and socially intelligent. Do not forget that. Narcissists, they know very well what you are experiencing. However, quite often this is only like at a cognitive level or an intellectual level. But they can understand the impact they have on others, but they will not feel the pain that you may be experiencing. Now, this is an important differentiation between the intellectual or the rational, the cognitive type of empathy, and the emotional, the affective type of empathy. So they may rationally understand what you're going through. They may rationally understand that they are manipulating you, but they do not feel the pain that it is really causing to you. And this again, like what I've already said, this is a big difference with, for instance, people on the autistic spectrum, where they are willing to understand others, but they struggle with understanding others. Although more research is being done on the role of empathy within narcissism, but this seems to be the current status quo as far as I could see from the literature. Overt narcissists, in contrast with covert narcissists, the overt ones, they can be quite actively aggressive with explicit shaming and manipulation, such as blaming you, being rude, criticizing, being sarcastic, things like that. And one of the books, I read the example of an overt narcissist that they would not tip a barista because they were horrible and I deserve a better treatment. And they would let the full establishment, everyone in the coffee place, they would let them know how horrible that barista was. And as we'll see, that's quite different in the covert narcissists. So the covert narcissists are people where the narcissism is more in the back garden, where it's more subtle, and they're often not in the center of attention, although not explicitly. Implicitly, they are. I often have the metaphor of like a glove, that they use other people like a glove. And you may not see that they are using others, but actually they are. So often they are the second person behind the leader, for instance. And quite often they seem quite small in the room, quite shy, humble, introverted, but it can have a huge, huge impact on the room. So they often covertly boost their ego by putting themselves down. So this is the big difference with the overt narcissists who actually put themselves up. The covert narcissists will put themselves down and hope that you will then put them up. So, for example, they do that via playing the role of the underdog. They will be fishing for compliments, for instance, via self-minimizing, such as, I'm not important, what I'm doing it's just very tiny. I've just made a very small, simple cake, it's nothing. And of course, the other person will say, oh no, you're amazing. The cake you baked is amazing. Oh, you're so amazing. So that is the kind of response that they are fishing for compliments. Often they seem to be self-sacrificing them a lot. Like, for instance, the political movements that I mentioned, the narcissistic leaders, they are putting themselves up all the time for getting arrested and doing very naughty stuff. And they get all the media attention for that. And this is a very good example of a covert narcissist who will be sacrificing themselves almost like a messiah because they're doing that for the movement, they're doing that for others. Or are they? Why is it actually to get the personal recognition, get the attention, for actually having had otherwise like kind of a simple and boring life? Good question. Quite often they seem to be empathic and they seem to be caring for others. Often the first thing you see is empathy. So that's very paradoxical. I'll say a bit more about it later. So they often also parade with achievements of others, of their kids or friends or family. And it's via this connection with the achievements of others that actually they get praise. So for instance, like a person may get praise like for instance, oh wow, your child is really doing amazing in school. You must be so proud of your child. You must be such a good parent. So they, by actually saying, yeah, I'm just a mother, by saying that, they will get that praise again. A very pathological example of this is also Munchausen by proxy. Not all narcissists will do this, but it can happen. Munchausen by proxy means that particularly a parent, but can also be any other carer, that they actually either make their victims ill, or they underline or exaggerate any physical problems or mental problems that they may have. An example is, for instance, a nurse who brings her daughter to a lot of specialists. One time it's about falling from the stairs. Another time it's about an earache. Another time is etc. But by showing actually how good they are in the care for the children, they get some respect from the doctors, they get attention from the doctors, from the friends, etc. And they hear things like, oh, it must be so hard to have such a difficult child, and you're such a good mother by looking after them and doing all the work for your child. So this is a way of also getting that praise and that attention. Really crucial differentiation is that the self-sacrifice for narcissists must always be in the public eye. Whereas true self-sacrifice, in my opinion, is usually hidden from the public eye, or people will try to hide what they've actually created. So whenever people put a self-sacrifice in the media, when they put it up where like doctors will hear about that, when all the friends hear about it, when they post about it on Facebook, for instance, like on Facebook, on Twitter, they tell how much they're suffering or how much they're looking after their children. When you hear those stories, well, there may be some narcissism involved there. But of course, there can be a real suffering. There can be like a real dedication and a real self-sacrifice. But most likely when you start to ask about self-sacrifice, little bits that you hear in the public, and when actually like real self-sacrifice, real empathic self-sacrifice, yeah, those people will, a lot of the details not share in public, and they will actually not want the self-sacrifice to become public. So, like I said, they may appear empathic. So often they can be nurses, therapists, political activists. But again, this is usually only cognitive empathy, not affective empathy. So they do not realize the pain that they're creating to others. And so the empathic behavior, showing off their empathy, that's usually very public and leads to a boost of the ego. So often they have fantasies, for instance, about rescuing the world. So it is not necessarily about getting attention for themselves, but it can also be getting attention for them having rescued the world. So they can have those fantasies about getting Nobel Prizes or being regarded like a crucial leader, things like that. So they often have difficulties dealing flexibly and realistically with emotions, such as feeling inadequate, anxious, depression. So they can have episodes of mental health issues. Often they show a lot of passive aggression, such as implicit shaming, and often they create a sense of confusion. So this is different with the overt narcissist, where you often know very clearly what's going on there and that you're being manipulated. With confusion, you're always like, as a victim, you're like, okay, am I being manipulated or not? Is this self-sacrifice real? Is it not? Or what are they doing? Often it's that confused state. I often have a feeling with those people, I have a feeling as if I'm in a mess, as if it's very uncertain, unclear. It's when I start to talk with others about it, I always feel messy, confused. Whereas with overt narcissists, I can usually very clearly tell others what's going on there. So also quite often it's more subtle. How it goes. So for instance, it's often via sabotage, procrastination, silent treatment. For instance, they delay in answering your emails. They come late at all your dates, or they're even not confirming the date at all. And subsequently, they will blame you in some way. And they start to pretend to be the victim of your behavior, of your emotional abuse. So they will rarely compliment you and they will hold grudges. So a good example is where the overt narcissist would tell everyone in the coffee place what a horrible barista they've had. The covert narcissist is more likely, for instance, to give a tip to the barista publicly so that everyone sees it and everyone hears it. So this is very important, I find. For me, this was an eye-opener to realize that a lot of the narcissists are actually more covert than overt. So let's now have a look at what do they do in the relationship, because there are a lot of relational games going on there, because that's what narcissism is all about. So I'll talk now a little bit about the different types of masks that people may have. That's a word that some people use. In transactional analysis, that's called eco states. In chemotherapy, that's called cognitive modes. I think that the name is not relevant. I found a book from Eric Byrne, Games That People Play, very helpful. And this model has been confirmed by a lot of research. I've actually conducted a systematic literature review or meta-analysis on this myself, together with Bojana van Rijn, published last year. So inside ourselves, we have those different states or different modes. And at different times, we show a different side of ourselves to others and to ourselves. And this is like a way of talking about ourselves that is kind of common nowadays. In society, those terms have become quite common. So we have an inner parent, an inner adult, and an inner child. And the parent inside themselves can be very critical. So for instance, they have high demands or they criticize us. But we can also have a nurturing parent, where we're actually looking after ourselves like a good parent would do. We can also have a free child who likes to play, who likes to rebel, who likes to resist authorities, who's creative. And there's the adapted child who is conforming to the rules, for instance, that parents give them. And so inside ourselves, we also have an adult function or an adult ego state or mode. And the adult mode is very much about dealing with reality, dealing with the constraints of reality, also seeing our impact we have on others, and also asking ourselves what's the most helpful for myself and others in the situation. So it's normal that in different situations we will show a different side of ourselves, and it's very healthy to flexibly change between all of those different roles. However, what we often see is that in healthy individuals, when I mean like mentally healthy people, that the adult function is something that we see quite often. and that is quite strongly developed. So it's a matter often about how often and how strong each of those modes are there. It's not a matter of whether they're there, because all of us have those modes, but it's more about how often are you stuck in the critical parent mode, and how strong is the critical parent then. So when I talk about narcissists, I'm talking about how often it is and how strong it is. I will see that the critical parent is often very strong. And the critical parent are things like bullying, gaslighting. And it can be very much a critical parent towards themselves, but even more often that they will go into a critical parent mode towards others. And whereas like often they have a nurturing parent where they will be nurturing themselves. So it's very much self-oriented, their inner nurturing parents. They will be self-soothing, but they will not really nurturing others. But if they nurture others, it's not for the sake of nurturing, or for nurturing others for actually who they are and for their needs. So they will most likely nurture you to push you into a child role, into, like for instance, the example was of the Munchausen by proxy, where a parent would put a child into the role of being sick. So an overt narcissist, they will manipulate you. They will nurture you. They will look after you to kind of glue you to them. And in the covert narcissist, it's more like that enforced nurturing and trying to put you in the role of the weak person who need to be nurtured. So we will go down to the free child mode, which often is quite strong in narcissists, where it's kind of, I sometimes call that also a party mode, self-soothing, no limits, feeling entitled, things like that. Whereas like an adopted child, that is almost absent, as people, narcissists are more likely to resist authorities, or that they're quite unsensible about what they can do. And the adult function seems to be quite absent, so that they're quite unrealistic in the demands of themselves and others and what they can do. Now, what does happen if you meet a narcissist? So the narcissist is on the left and the victim is on the right. So often when they go into their critical parent role, they actually are saying, okay, I'm very critical and I have high demands and I want you to adapt to them. So they put you down to this adapted child role. They can also put you in the role of the adapted child that needs to be nurtured, that need to be looked after, because you cannot do that yourself. And they are the strong ones who will help you. They may also go into a free child role where they're saying, let's enjoy, let's be free, without limits. And so without any adult function. And they're telling, well, join me in my party mode, no limits, drugs and drink for everyone, over the top happy. And you must join them in their free child role. You're not allowed to adapt to have some reasonable adult-like limitations. For instance, to say, well, we've had enough drinks. No, that's not something you can do. Imagine that you will at some point say, well, hey, listen, we've been partying enough. And after 4 beers, it's enough. Or we are too loud for the neighborhood. So you're saying, well, let's be a little bit realistic. Well, you're talking as an adult to them, but they struggle with the adult function. So they will explode. Most likely they will come back in 2 different ways. That's what I often see is they will come back at you as a critical parent and start blaming you. That, for instance, saying that you are such a party pooper, that how horrible you are, what a horrible person you are. So they're putting you down, trying to put you in the child role. On the other hand, they can start to play the victim. And they can start sobbing. They can become very sad. And they start to demand you to nurture them. But still, the adult will be absent. Quite often, narcissists will also include a third person in their manipulations. So, for instance, if narcissist A wants to get to person B, and you set up your boundaries, for instance, in your relationship, they'll still try to get to you via person C. This is also called triangulation. And this sometimes also, this can also lead to a so-called drama triangle. where you may be stuck with two other people in the role of rescuer, persecutor, and victim. So for instance, a narcissist could say, well, let me help you. Or they may be in a persecutor role saying, well, it's all your fault. And you can, for instance, be forced into the role of poor me, of the victim. It can also be the other way around, that they actually go into the victim role or into the persecutor role or the rescuer role. So it can be that over time you get stuck in this relational triangle where you are like, well, actually, that's not very realistic, and that you feel stuck. Okay, so we've been talking about the different types of narcissism. We've been talking about relational games. Let's now talk about gaslighting. The term gaslighting comes from the movie Gaslight. And in the movie Gaslight, the man, who was very clearly a narcissist, he told his wife that she was being crazy because she thought that the gaslights, because they didn't have electric lights at the time, she thought that there were ghosts in the house who were changing all the lights in the house. But actually, it was just him switching them off and on, etc. But he blamed her. So this is gaslighting. And that has been a term that has become very popular since approximately a decade ago again. I think for very good reasons, because it's a psychological mechanism that we must be aware of. So gaslighting is a favorite manipulation technique by narcs. And all the different books, they have different ways to categorize this. I've created my own categories when I look at all the examples that all the books give. I will mainly go into the different categories. You can read on my PowerPoint some of the example of that. In the first place, they can use gaslighting to silence, control, degrade, or punish the victim, so that the victim will do what the narcissist wants. So they can explicitly say, do this, or they can make you feel guilty, ashamed about yourself. They can have continuous subtle criticisms on you. They can use your lack of self-confidence, such as doubting your intelligence. It can be verbal abuse, treat you like a child, threats and aggression, retaliation, revenge, like a silent treatment, and also inconsistent and confusing behavior, such as sometimes being warm, sometimes cold. They can also try to make the victim feel crazy and doubt their own reality, and so that they actually take over the narcissist's reality. They can say things like, you sound crazy. I didn't mean this. You're overreacting. You're too sensitive. You're weak. Your skin is too thin. I never said that. You know how I feel about this, but still you're saying this. Your angry response to me shows precisely that you are irrational and weak. They can also be blatantly lying and brainwashing. They're always right. They will use an authority argument, and they will say things like, you don't know what you're talking about. I'm the expert. But they will never actually give you the full evidence or proof. They can also have false accusations with malicious intent. And there are a lot of logical fallacies in the reasoning, such as slippery slope arguments and false herrings, for instance, where they give irrelevant information. For instance, they will start attacking you about totally different things than actually what you were talking about. Another form of gaslighting is where they try to disable your claims as a victim, so that in the end you will drop the claim. Such as they will say, well, it's not a big deal, just a joke. Often they also have double messages. For instance, they're saying, well, of course you're free to have your opinion, of course, but. And there can also be a difference between the verbal explicit or the non-verbal implicit communication, where people can say, I'm just asking questions. And you can also see like their facial expressions that say something very different than the words. So it's very confusing often. They can also say that your request is way too much work or is unfair to them. And they can promise things but never do it. They can also try to justify the behavior towards the victim, so that, and even in such a way that the victim will actually start to praise the narcissist for the good intentional behavior. So a person can say, well, I'm hard on you because I love you. Or I would not have done this if you would not have done that first. Or they can say, well, I understand it's not a perfect situation, but we're doing this for a bigger purpose. It can also be that they try to get, it can also be the narcissist use others to get to the victim. I've already said how, for instance, drama triangles can be used, or triangulation. And the aim is that the victim gets isolated and that their validation of reality gets undermined. So, for instance, they start to attack your family and friends and involve others. So let you believe that others attack you. and they will project their own desires and jealousy onto you. So that is gaslighting. But how does it start? It often doesn't start that way. It often starts with love bombing. And the people say, well, he's so kind. I'm so lucky to have found her. It was different. It was so amazing. It's like the kind of the white bread weeks in a marriage that movies talk about. So, but after that, there's often a period of devaluation, there's a lot of gaslighting, and in the end, the discard, where they will get rid of you. So what's the emotional impact of this gaslighting, those relational games, and those types of narcissism? I really like the book from Marla McCoy about the gaslighting recovery book, where she talks about the effects of gaslighting in particular, and that how this can create a lack of confidence and self-esteem, unhappiness, unnecessary apologizing for things that you are actually not responsible for, indecisiveness, confusion, self-doubt, anxiety, that you start to deny the gaslighting, and that you may start to feel helpless or powerless because that's what you've learned from the narcissist. Whatever you do, you won't be able to get away. No sense of depression or extreme stress. More in general, how do we cope when we are under attack by other people or by traumatic or stressful life situations? As our body often responds automatically to stress with fight, flight, or freezing. I'll give some examples of that. These are automatic mechanisms that we can already see even in animals. And we do the same with, for instance, in a response to narcissists, where we can freeze in the way of surrendering to the narcissist. We can fight them via kind of counterattack, or we can try to flee via running away. And these are all different responses to the narcissistic behavior. First, we can surrender or accept the narcissistic abuse. So we could call that a kind of freezing in our behavior. So we surrender, we self-sacrifice our own needs for the narcissist. Possibly because we're fear to be abandoned and fear of missing out. We can also start to feel defective and ashamed. Because that is what the gaslighting was all about, is to make you feel so defective that you feel that you cannot survive on your own without them. You will inhibit your emotions, so you will not say how you feel and what you need. You start to mistrust others, not only the narcissist, but also other people. You may raise your own standards, such as trying more and more to be the perfect partner, perfect child, or perfect friend. You may also accept the narcissistic stories as the truth, and even if you may know that they're false. And it can lead to feelings of insecurity, intimidation, anxiety, resentment, helplessness, or also post-traumatic stress. Another form of freezing is that you deny what's going on, that you deny the facts, ignore the facts. You may either believe the truth of everything that the narcissist is telling, or you may actually be deliberately lying towards yourself. Quite often the victims actually continue living in the dream, and they party alongside the free child of the narcissist. They may become addicted, for instance, via alcohol or drugs, to actually avoid feeling the pain of the abuse. Then we can also overcompensate for the narcissistic abuse in the kind of fighting, for instance, by developing their own narcissistic traits and developing a sense of entitlement, anger outbursts at others. It's almost like as if the body is wanting to fight, but often at the wrong time, at the wrong place, and in the wrong proportion. It can even be that an overcompensation is actually that you try to convert others to join the cult from the narcissist, that you invite others to join the party from the narcissist. A more healthy response can be to flee, although it's now a little bit black or white in how describing this necessarily as fleeing. But it's very much about seeing the reality and accepting how you feel and what you need, setting boundaries, self-care, healing from trauma, developing an authentic voice. I'll say more about it later. I really found it very interesting when I found out about the so-called human magnet syndrome, as one of the researchers in the field has called that. Because quite often, a lot of people ask themselves, why am I attracted to narcissists? Why are there so many narcissists in my life? It's almost like as if I'm a magnet and I'm pulling in narcissists, or all the way around, I'm being pulled towards narcissists. Well, Let's start with the good things. Narcissists can be fun to be around with. They're good party organizers. They are successful. They attract nice people around them. It's nice to be part of something intense and great and positive. It can also be that you're used to doing this particular type of dance. Because if you've been used to adjusting your behavior towards narcissists, for instance, because you grew up with a narcissistic parent or narcissistic siblings, then you've become used to this type of behavior. You think this is normal. And this is how it dances with other people. This is how we do relationships. And you'll be looking for similar patterns in relationships later in your life. Narcissists can also fulfill or trigger your own needs. So, for instance, when you feel defective and negative about yourself, then actually a narcissist can give you a sense of success or can actually give you an opportunity to sacrifice yourself for them. Narcissists can also fill your existential gap, such as when you do not have your own meaning, when you feel lost in life, when you feel insecure in life, when your parents have not given you direction in life. And actually, narcissists can give you direction and leadership, particularly in part of a cult. It can also be that you lack assertiveness, that you need to learn how to be assertive instead of passive in relationship with others. And quite often also, we get messages from our parents about this is how we do relationships. Researchers and therapists have given this different types of names, like this human magnet syndrome. That's been called codependency, enablers, but also in a more positive sense, like a lack of self-compassion or self-love deficit disorder. I think that the label doesn't matter. It's just also important to see that you should not blame yourself, because quite often victims from narcissists, particularly when you've been raised in an insecure, unsafe family with narcissists around, for instance, then it's not something that you've decided to do. It's not your decision. Quite often it's a response to your own traumatic life experiences. So I don't like some of the psychiatric labeling, which seems a little bit victimizing you and blaming you. Whereas the narcissists are already blaming you. Let's not put it on top of it. So quite often what we see is what Rosenberg, in the amazing book on the human magnet syndrome, what he calls the relationship compatibility continuum, is we often look for people who match us, who fulfill some of our needs. So a very codependent person will look for a very pathologically narcissist person, so that together you reach a neutral point and you compensate each other. Rosenberg has identified several patterns and characteristics of codependence, such as being in denial, low self-esteem, complying to the narcissist, also being part of a controlling type of situation, and also avoidance of him. And there's some other traits as well. And also can be that the person is actually starving themselves of the love by others, or from themselves. But these are just some examples, and have to think for yourself in which regard you may be part of a human magnet syndrome. Again, this is not to blame you, but this is to become aware of your place in relationships with narcissists. Because the question is why have you not left the narcissists, or why did you come to them in the first place? And you may have your very fair reasons for that. Because quite often the origins of this codependency or this self-love disorder often comes from intergenerational messages, where you've learned okay, this is how we do relationships. It can also be the result from a certain attachment style. As you can see here on the left, is when your parents have been very consistently responsive, you're more likely to develop secure attachment. So you'll be also developing healthy relationships with other people later in your life. But when your parents are consistently unresponsive or inconsistently responsive, or even frightening or emotionally unreachable, then the way how you attach yourself in relationships to other people will be more disorganized, and will be more insecure, or will be more anxiety in your relationships. Because this is what you learn. This is how relationships work, and your fundamental ideas about people, your mistrust or trust in people, is very much late in our early lives, in our early years in our lives, and often those things are repeated later in our lives. And narcissists often make use of that. So also people in cults, we often see people with quite insecure attachments often around them. So often we see that people with a history of emotional, physical, sexual, or religious childhood abuse, that they are more pulled into relationships or friendships with narcissists. So it's understandable, because in our early life, we've learned to adjust our behavior just to get our basic needs fulfilled, such as safety, love, food. And we knew, okay, if I praise my narcissistic parent, I will get what I need. And if I start to put myself away and my needs away, then actually my parents will give me what I need. Then you will start to deny your own needs, obviously. And as a child, you often believe your parents, very understandable. And we internalize the criticism because they are our source of authority. And also quite often when our parents have not given us any positive affirmations, then we will also not have positive self-affirmations. For instance, when the love from our parents has been conditional and the attention has been conditional, for instance, only when you had big results, only then did you get the full love or full attention. In other words, if your parents are not saying, you're okay, I love you, no matter how you're doing and regardless of your results at school, I love you, you're okay. And then you also develop the idea that you're okay. But if your parents are only giving conditional love or even rejecting you, then you also start to say that towards yourself. There's also the phenomenon of trauma bonding, where in times of trauma, when there's no one else around, that we actually start to bond, even with people who are very dangerous for us. So they did some experiments with several rhesus monkeys who were orphaned. And they gave a rhesus monkey like a robot. And the rhesus monkey started to attach themselves to this robot. And that's what children do as well. And that's what we do is, so clinging onto a narcissist can be the type of trauma bonding, whereas actually the person you're bonding with is actually very unsafe and is actually very bad for you. And finally, there's also that we can get addicted to the relational intensity, like neurologically, that we are, it's our habit that we feel good when there's a lot of emotions going on, because big emotions can be very addictive. I really love the book from David Shemmings and von Shemmings, which is about understanding disorganized attachment. So very much to understand where our human neck magnet syndrome actually starts from and what to do with it. Why do we not leave even when it's unhealthy? Often there are many different reasons for that. And sometimes it is called the narcissistic abuse syndrome. So we may be uncertain or unclear about the real dangers of the abuser. We may fear consequences. They may threaten us, may possibly retaliate. We may be afraid that our friends or family may reject us or isolate us. We may be physically entrapped, financially, or there are many forms of subtle coercion or manipulation. And the gaslighting may work, and you may doubt yourself and believe the reality. And you can also have like some kind of addiction, some kind of withdrawal from your addiction, because when you, for instance, leave a narcissist, life is more boring and not that emotionally intense. And you need to get used to more subtle emotions instead of the big fireworks that they create. Particularly feelings of pathological loneliness can be very difficult to deal with. And to avoid those kind of withdrawal symptoms, we may actually stay with our narcissist, even though that can be very unhealthy. We also need to see this in the wider society and also in narcissistic cults, because it seems that we are a nation of narcissists. There are a lot of books and increasing attention for the narcissism epidemic about our selfie taking, particularly how the West has become very self-obsessed. Also, my books on the economics of meaning in life, I describe very much how our economic and political system is very much built on some of the ideas of narcissism, but particularly on very superficial ideas about what's meaningful in life, and how those types of materialistic, self-oriented types of meanings, how they are very much stimulated by economy. Like we are stimulated all the time. The images we get, for instance, from all the adverts, where we see people boosting themselves. A lot of commercials are actually about abuse of other people, taking advantage of others, being selfish. For instance, looking after your own looks, how good that is, instead of looking after each other. So we get all those narcissistic messages all the time, because that is also how our economy seems to work a lot. And a specific thing can be a cult. Cults are often led by narcissists, by narcissistic leaders. There are many different types of cults that are possible. Of course, we know the religious cults. And the book Leaving the Vault is a very good book from Marlene Winell about people who are leaving a religion. Very, very good book. It's also, you can also have a cult at your workplace with leaders, for instance, your manager. But also academic cults. I see that a lot as being a researcher at universities. I'm very fortunate that I work currently in a very good place, but I've worked in the past at universities where it was all about, the full department seemed to be about praising the main professor and how amazing they are. Yes, they were good. I'm not denying that, but not in everything. They are not like God. They are not omnipotent. There was a very weird academic cult. And also students started to complain where they felt that the leaders or the organization of the full university degree, that it was more about actually their success, the success of the department, and not really looking after their development as students, and taking extra time to listen to the students' needs and giving students feedback. Now it was much more about success and the numbers of the department. There's also political cults and also political activist cults. A good example of the latter is I've been involved in several political activist campaigns. For example, I was one of the people who were involved in the conceptualization of the climate change environmentalist movement, Extinction Rebellion. And unfortunately, the movement was, I was kicked out quite quickly from the movement by several narcissists who were leading on that. And they took over a lot of the psychological input that I gave them, a lot of ideas, even the name of the movement they took from me. And it became like a cult around certain narcissistic leaders, and where I see that the other volunteer activists, they need to dedicate everything for the movement, whereas it almost seems to become like a cult. I'm not saying it's totally like that. I'm not saying everyone is like that. No, absolutely not. But there are some traits there. And I've heard several complaints. And as a psychotherapist, I've been helping a lot of political activists who have been burned out. And that's often a sign that there may be a cult going on. So a cult uses psychological coercion to recruit and indoctrinate and retain members. The leader is often self-appointed, dogmatic, almost like a messianic and charismatic character. And they also believe that the ends justify all the means, particularly in raising the recruitment or raising awareness for the campaigns. And in the end, the money will go to their priorities and not to really like the mental health and the well-being of the activists, for instance. So they try to isolate the activists and not exposing them to the outside world or, for instance, proper scientific research. They monopolize their perception, so they will have like their own workshops, their own lectures, where they will not invite speakers from elsewhere, for example. They humiliate and degrade people who are not following the doctrine. There will be threats, there will be some sense of superiority of the leaders, and there's a lot of exhaustion, a lot of burnout going on. So a cult is a system of religious worship or ritual, or a devoted attachment or an extravagant admiration for a person or principle or a group of followers. So research also shows that narcissistic leaders can be found in many different groups, but I'll give some examples of what the research says on this. Narcissistic leaders in cults, they often focus on an external threat, such as the devil. That's what you see in spiritual cults, about refugees. So for instance, like a political cult can say, oh, we're being threatened by all the refugees coming from abroad. And like kind of the full Brexit cult that we've seen a bit here in the UK. And also around Donald Trump as well, obviously. Can also be that people can see also like a threat in climate change or in capitalism. Can also be, often there's an appeal to existential urgency, where they will say, well, commit now, otherwise everyone will die. Or we only have 2 years left to stop climate change, things like that. So this is very clever because they use the phenomenon of the terror management theory, is where you raise the sense of terror, of existential urgency, that will create anxiety. And that anxiety, often people respond to that, particularly when you lack kind of self-esteem, when you lack scientific knowledge, etc. They're more likely to follow some authoritarian leaders. You'll be less critical. It's a very well-known phenomenon. So we see that how, for instance, Nigel Farage during the Brexit campaign, how he showed pictures of refugees coming into the UK, even though that has nothing really to actually do with the full Brexit story. But he was creating that sense of terror and a sense of threat, due to which people become more authoritarian, more conservative, and people will start defending themselves via this fight-flight mechanisms. So that's often how that works. Over there, quite visionary, and they have convincing stories about utopia, and they can be good, they can be convincing. So that can also be a positive thing. They often take credit for other people's contributions via plagiarism, copy pasting. So when you ask them how they got to an idea, they will say it's themselves, and they will deny that anyone else has contributed anything to it, which is very intriguing. They will exaggerate the uniqueness of their ideas, whereas like kind of like the ideas, many other people may have had those. They will also exaggerate the feasibility and the helpfulness or the outcomes of the ideas. Like the example I've already given in some of the political activism movements that I've been involved in, the focus is very much on the mobility, on mobilizing a lot of public support and creating public awareness in the media. But when they ask, okay, how does it lead to, for instance, stopping climate change? There's no strategy around that. They're saying, well, we just hope that the public and politicians and companies, they will just do what's good for actually all of us. They will know how to do that. But like, I'm not sure. I think we need to guide companies or politicians way more specific, because otherwise companies can use it in their own advantage. For example, we see a lot of greenwashing at the moment. So for instance, a lot of the climate movement is only giving a new way for companies to market their all their company products, because they're now telling like, okay, all the climate is so horrible, but buy our product because we think about the climate. But they're not really doing that. Similarly, like politicians, they get voted, they get elected, even like Boris Johnson and Theresa May, that they spoke about the climate. But they, for instance, now Boris Johnson has given subsidies for coal industry and for opening new petrol fields. So it's not about those leaders on those political activisms. They are not really thinking about real change, because they're not really interested in that, it seems sometimes. They seem more interested in just growing a movement, getting public awareness, getting that recognition, and hopefully getting the Nobel Prize someday. So they seem to lack a kind of reality check, and it's just about faith. Because when I ask them, then questions like, okay, how do you think that this public awareness will create change? They will say, well, just believe me. I'm the authority, I know. Or I've heard so many times, I can give you the evidence, but not now yet. Also, people are even saying, well, yes, we don't know yet, it's an experiment, but what's the alternative to the experiment? That is doom. We will all die if we do not try to stop climate change now. They may have a point there, I'm denying that, but I'm like, well, maybe like a experiment that's very likely to be ineffective. So let's look at more effective strategies. Often they will not give scientific references for the effects of the strategy, or they have obvious logical fallacies in the reasoning, or they're secret about evidence. They can also be unclear about how the actions and commitment will lead to their utopia. Like, okay, if I as an activist do this or that now, or how will it lead to, actually, how will it prevent the climate change? They cannot lead to that domino effect of where your actions will make the change. Or like in a religious cult, for instance, like, if you, for instance, save one soul, to call it that way, how will that help for the kind of wider movement? How will that help actually bring Christ returning to us sooner? Things like that. And often there's a lot of covert narcissistic traits in cults. So for instance, they will publicly self-sacrifice, they will have fake empathy, things like that. So often it feels very warm and if they seem to be very good. But actually when you start to look at it, it's actually not. It's all about them. So they often create commitment via guilt and shame and via using a sense of inadequacy in the followers, like you're weak if you do not commit now. So, and there's also no real empathy. So they will not look after social psychological needs from others. If someone reminds them of the negative personal impact, then that's minimized by referring to the larger purpose of the movement. The leader can also give a sense of meaning, which can fulfill the existential emptiness in the followers. Like I already said, often people in cults, they often, but not always, they have some questions around their own sense of meaning in life. They may feel lost in society, or they may actually come with their own traumatic life experiences or their own attachment issues. And that can be fulfilled by being part of this narcissistic cult. The members can feel powerless in society, but by being part of the cult, they can create some sense of power, albeit like an illusionary power and not a real power that can create real change. Quite often there's a fake freedom where they will say, of course, you're free to research and develop your own ideas. But actually there's no real debate or there's no real accountability. They will never give to you the evidence for their ideas. They often escalate a commitment. So it will start small, but they will, after each step, they will ask you more. And that's the so-called foot in the door technique. It's like when you start small, you're more likely to do also a second thing, which is bigger. And so until the end, the possibly cult members can even kill themselves. As you know, for instance, from the David Lyons in the United States. And they often start to separate the cult members from reality and from the friends. So they start to tell how horrible the friends are. And they will say, but here you have your own family, you have your own friends in our cult. Okay, we've had this very short deviation in this presentation where we've been focusing on the narcissism in society and the role of narcissistic leaders in cults. Before that, we've been speaking about the different types of narcissism, the relational games and gaslighting that narcissists do, and our emotional responses, the impact it has on us, but also how in the long term we may have become a part of a kind of a human magnet syndrome where we feel pulled towards narcissists. Now the big question is, how do we deal with narcissists and how can we heal? This picture is of Donald Trump. Often I give Donald Trump as a textbook example of narcissism. Of course, he also has some antisocial traits, but a lot of psychiatrists, they agree on that Donald Trump is a very clear example of narcissism. So if you want to get some examples, you can have a look at him. Other researchers have suggested that also, for instance, Boris Johnson has also some narcissistic traits, and several other influencers in social media also seem to have some of those traits. So that may help you to kind of have some examples, some stereotypic example of narcissism. Although quite often the narcissism is not as clear as they are. So first, how can we deal with gaslighting? This is like a slide from the Mind Journal, and they say gaslighting is a psychological manipulation strategy that's used to influence, intimidate, or gain power over someone. And it can make the victim doubt their own thoughts, emotion, and reality. The signs of gaslighting, we've already spoken about it before, are things like doubting your own judgment, lack of confidence, self-esteem is poor, issues around your identity, inability to make decisions, feeling confused, self-blame, self-criticism. And it's often due to the number of techniques that they may be using, such as countering anything you say, denying, withholding, diverting, or making everything look very trivial when you talk about your needs. So how can you cope as a victim with those techniques, those gaslighting techniques that narcissists use? Try to gain a new perspective. Don't buy their lies. Focus on the truth. Do your own research. Don't defend them. And definitely do not use logic, because that will not help. And if needed, just walk away. An intervention that I often find helpful is what transactional analysis have called, it's called bullseye intervention. And that means that you as an adult response to the narcissist, where you recognize the different sides inside themselves. Whereas in a narcissist, all the different parts of themselves can be quite fragmented, and they can be very dominant in one particular mode. And to get them out of that particular mode, it may be helpful to address the different modes that they have inside themselves. Like all of us have all different parts of themselves. So, for example, imagine that you're at a party with a big narcissist, and the narcissist has organized a party, and maybe drinking a bit too much, and maybe partying too much, the music may be too loud, they maybe become a little bit boundaryless, in the sense that they are saying things to others that others find not nice. So what you can then do is that you first recognize actually, the good things, and also the things that they can possibly also criticize you for about if you wouldn't recognize that. So, for example, show gratitude for things where praise is due. Give them praise. So, for instance, start by saying, "Thank you for organizing this party. It's good to see that so many people have come, and that we've been enjoying ourselves." So that's how you start. So the ego feel boosted, like, okay, great. They cannot criticize you for not recognizing them. And then you say, well, I can also see that you are enjoying yourself a lot. So saying that you recognize every child. And you say, I can also understand that you want to continue this party for way longer, get more drunk, and possibly put music up even more. I hear you. I hear where you're coming from, because I see how much you love partying. And now you can add the adult, that you say, well, at the same time, I also see how the neighbors have been complaining. I can also see how you may be getting a bit too drunk, and tomorrow you may have a hangover, which actually you have important stuff to do tomorrow. And I also see that some other people, they seem not so very happy with you being too drunk. I know that that's not your intention, to actually cross the boundaries of others. However, I think that it may be time to finish our party, and all that you at least stop drinking. So you give very clear instructions about what you want. That you say, okay, I want now the party to stop, or that you, for instance, say, well, let's do it for half an hour more. But be very clear in your boundaries, and do not negotiate about that. Because most likely they will try with a free child to say something like, yeah, but I want to continue the party. You're horrible. I say, well, possibly I am. I hear you. I hear that you want to party. You want to be the free child. I know. I hear you. But hey, we cannot always be that. And at the same time, we also need to think about tomorrow. And hey, you can party another time. You can organize another time. And then they may come into their critical parent role and start criticizing you for everything, saying how horrible you are, and that they know way better, and that they know the boundaries better than you do, that people are enjoying, that you are wrong, etc. So they try to push you most likely then in that child role. And you'll say, well, I hear you. I hear what you're saying. But I'm continuing to say that I hear you want to party. I hear that you have a different opinion. Hey, this is my opinion. And I also see, hey, that we need to be realistic about, you not getting a hangover tomorrow. So this kind of interaction, what you do is you address all those different sides of them, and you address the adult. And I find this very helpful when you see all those different modes, and they can be switching between different modes very quickly. And whereas you continue coming from your adult position, and you're saying, in that sense, I'm not letting you put me in a child role. I'm not letting you put me in a critical parent role. I'm just addressing all those different sides inside yourself. So how to apply this in specific situations? It may be helpful to develop some steps for yourself. I found it helpful to actually write some steps down beforehand, before I would meet like a narcissist to discuss a topic, or also at the workplace at some point, I found it helpful to write down, okay, what am I going to say? If my manager says this, how will I respond? So first, it's important, take a breath and respond at your time and your space, not theirs. Do not play the game. So for instance, say, well, thank you for your input. I'll come back at that at another time. Believe in yourself and your feelings, because you feel what you feel, regardless of the manipulations. Do not let them change your feelings. You feel what you feel, and that's valid. They may have a different feeling. They may have different opinion. Fair enough. We're all unique human beings with each our own feelings and opinions. And you have yours. And you have the right to be heard. So tell that you recognize the positive intention. So for instance, give thanks and proportionate praise where praise is due. And tell them also that you think that their hurting may not be intentional. This can be a tricky one, but it's my experience that you avoid, by saying this, you avoid that they feel attacked. Because that's very important, because they're very sensitive for any criticism or any sense of attack. So if you miss to give them like a reason, if you justify the behavior to some extent, they may feel less hurt and they're more likely to follow you. Tell also that you understand where they come from. So have an empathic understanding of their free child. And tell how their behavior has made you feel. So appeal to the adult and use I statements like, I feel this or that. Instead of saying, you were this or that. That's not helpful. But tell also what you specifically want in the future. So appeal to the adult. Give very clear limits, rules. Tell about the kind of reciprocity that you would like. And tell what the consequences are if they do not do this. And keep to it. So that's very important, because they will test your limits. They will test the consequences. Very simple. If they do not follow the rule, there's a consequence to it. They will learn. It's very hard, but quite often it's my experience that otherwise they'll continue pushing your boundaries. That's also the picture that you can see here on the slide. However, do not expect them to understand you. Do not expect a real apology, because they will say things like, I'm sorry, but the apology will not be timely. It will be focused on you and not on their actions, such as, I'm sorry that you feel this way. Not, I'm sorry I did something wrong. No. And often they won't give any promises or only false promises. Do not argue or debate. Very simple, say, well, I do not want to argue or discuss, or thank you for your opinion, but I have a different opinion. Agree to disagree. Expect that they will blame you and make you feel guilty and weak. Well, that's their thing. See that as their problem, not yours. And expect covert narcissists that they may play the victim. So bear in mind, the victim can also be aggressors at the same time. They can be stuck in the so-called drama triangle, as I've explained before. Narcissists may also find it difficult to change. So therefore, sometimes the best is simply to go no contact at all. And also bear in mind that the worst for narcissists is if you're not responding to them or ignoring all the gaslighting. They hate that. So you may want to consider leaving. So in the first place, observe what's going on and assess the pros and cons of staying with them. And also mainly also the impact it has on yourself. Check your reality. Because most likely you will think that they are fantastic. You'll think, okay, but it is a good relationship, isn't it? And it gives a sense of safety, a sense of what you think is harmony or good, but actually it isn't. So identify your own needs, your own blind spot, your habits and traumas. For instance, also ask friends to help you with that, with the kind of reality check. But you also may want to go to a therapist to get a realistic sense in about what's really going on there, and also to see your own blind spots and to check your triggers, such as when are you particularly angry or sad, and what are causes of that, but also physical symptoms even. Then start to differentiate. You are you, and you have your needs. These are your boundaries. You're not the other. And then be realistic in your expectations. Like, for instance, some moderate narcissists may change a little bit, but particularly large narcissists are very difficult to change. And think about what are the costs of trying to change them and then finding out that you can't change them. What are the costs for yourself? Emotional costs, but also like a waste of time, because life is short. Be honest about how much you're hurting emotionally towards yourself. Be compassionate and patient with yourself. So do not judge yourself, and try to understand yourself. And start with small, tiny steps. And very, very important, I find, is check the reality. For instance, what are the facts? For instance, when you're in a cult, check for any scientific evidence for the claims they do. For instance, via scholar.google.com, where you can find a lot of scientific research. Create your own space and time next to the narcissistic relationship. This is build other friendships. Develop your own hobbies on your own without the narcissist. And ask for support from friends. Express your emotions and ask them to help you with checking what's real, what's not real. Also do exercises to get in touch with your own feelings again, such as mindfulness, meditation, focusing. And physical exercises to get the stress out of your body. Go hiking, go into nature. I find nature really important. And also learn what healthy narcissism is, because not all narcissism is bad. Quite often you start to doubt yourself. You start to think that you are the narcissist. Therefore, learn to differentiate what's healthy and what's unhealthy narcissism. Finally, how can we heal? I really like those pyramids in the book from Rosenberg about human magnet syndrome, where he is saying, well, we need to change our pyramids in life from past till the present, how from the so-called self-love deficit disorder pyramid, how we can change that into the self-love abundance pyramid. I would say, just read the book. Not everything there's evidence-based, and I have, personally as a researcher, I have a lot of questions about the book, but I still find it interesting and inspiring, at least also for my own journey, where he's also saying, well, let's have a look at the attachment trauma that may be at the core of your addiction to be pulled towards narcissists. Look at that. Look at your feelings of shame. Look at your feelings of loneliness, of your aching, etc. But instead of the negative side, try to make it all more conscious. Be consciously aware of it. Do not hide it anymore. And therapy can help with that. Also, for instance, EMDR can be a very good way to get over some traumas, particularly in early life. But also cognitive behavior therapy can help you to become aware of some of the basic patterns that you have in your reasoning, become aware of your blind spots. And instead, also develop some more core self-love, where you have a realistic and empowered sense of self, and where you're comfortable in your own skin and feel secure and stable, and so that you can develop mutual reciprocal relationships with others. We have, like, in the end, a self-love abundance. So what does this mean more in practice? So some people call that self-compassion. Self-compassion may consist of multiple aspects, such as mindfulness. You may have heard the term, like with mindfulness exercise, which are a type of meditation exercises. What it's mainly about is that we recognize when we're stressed or when we struggle, and that we say, well, that's simply what it is. And I'm not judging myself. I'm not overreacting. But saying, yes, I see I'm struggling. I see that I feel manipulated. I observe that I feel gaslighted. And I'm not judging myself for that I'm allowing that. It is just what it is at this moment. And now the question is, what am I going to do with that? So also be kind towards yourself. So be supportive and understanding towards yourself when you have a hard time, instead of being harshly self-critical. So you can remember that most likely the narcissist has tried to develop or trigger your sense of adapted child or your sense of the self-critical parent. So you will most likely have a very strong self-criticism. But instead of that, try to nurture yourself and develop more of that nurturing parent side of yourself. And also remember that everyone makes mistakes, and that all of us experience difficulties at times. We're not alone, we're connected. And also reach out to other people. Go on Facebook. There's so many amazing Facebook groups where you can learn about how to deal with narcissism and gaslighting. And Bahari, in her book, she describes what is healthy narcissism and what are healthy and unhealthy relationships. And so, for instance, and I like some of those ideas where actually, when you look at this overview in this white box, we're saying, well, people may be persistent, and it can be healthy, that they try to push their agenda, but the agenda is mainly for the benefit of others, not of themselves. And they are very attuned to the inner world of others. And they do not only know that, they will pay attention to that and try to help you. They're charismatic, they're social, and they know also where the boundaries are. And they will not let themselves fooled. They can be leaders, they can be visionaries, they can be visionaries. And there's some very good politicians, for instance. And then I also think about people like, for instance, Mandela or Desmond Tutu. They totally keep their values. They are still very empathic and compassionate. That's actually the core of their leadership, I dare to say. They can even be very, very committed to the mission. So that you may think, hey, isn't that narcissism? Well, at least it's not unhealthy narcissism, I think. Because as long as you're still generous, dedicated, and unafraid of being real, and also saying where the limitations are. And yes, they still want some positive approval like all of us want. We're all human beings. But they're not dependent on the approval of others because they have that self-love and they feel loved by themselves and they don't need you to know that they are okay. And in the end, what's way more important than getting approval is to make a difference in the world, make the world a better place, help others. In a similar way, they can be determined, they can be confrontational, but they can also, but that is more about in a sensible, proportionate way, where, for instance, they can give constructive criticism to another person, but without destroying the soul or attacking them as a person. And they can, for instance, give positive feedback, and they give you a larger perspective. For instance, often research supervisors or clinical supervisors, they sometimes can be quite bad at giving feedback, where feedback almost destroys your soul. There's a very big narcissistic culture in the academic world, where it almost seems that not only your paper has been totally destroyed, but also your soul. Like, how were you able as a researcher to write something like this? That can be very hard to deal with. But remember that often tells more about the criticizer, because a healthy academic would, for instance, say first the good bits in what you've done, and they would also give the overview about. They would give a bigger perspective. They would see your developmental journey, and they would state about the kind of state of the field. Then they would say, well, there are bits that can be improved. So you would still not feel very bad about yourself. You would feel actually empowered. So even when they criticize you, you will feel empowered. And that's the difference between healthy and unhealthy narcissism. And also, like, people can feel fearful, and sometimes even they can sometimes not give an apology, but that can sometimes be needed, but without necessarily abusing others. And on the long term, there's a balance between giving and taking. And that's, I think, a very important one. It's like people can be narcissistic in a tiny area in their life, or in a very tiny period, because narcissism can help you to push through good things. But in other areas in the life, or at any other moments in time, there will be more like a balance with other people. And it's a balancing that that's very important in relationships. For instance, it can be helpful in relationships. Sometimes, for instance, when you're literally sick, yes, you can ask for some care from others, from your partner, from your parent. But when you're better, you will, for instance, then take care of them when it's needed. So there's a balance again on the long term. So it's not everywhere. It's not rigid. It's not black or white. With narcissistic people, their behavior is always there, and also in a very strong way. So do not be afraid of having some narcissistic traits that you may recognize in your own life, because to some extent that's healthy. So very important is what I found also in my own personal journey from the narcissistic herd that, that the narcissists, where they came into a little bit of my sense of self. So I've learned the importance of positive self-affirmations. This is particularly important for people who have never had the positive affirmations from the parents. And there are many different self-affirmations that you can find online. Here on the left in the yellow, you find some examples. I find particularly those others that I've written down here, it's very helpful to deal with the undermining of my self-esteem by narcissists. So, for example, I can tell myself, I deserve to be treated with respect. I do not deserve to be emotionally manipulated and abused. My opinion and views are valuable. I'm compassionate towards the parts of me that have been hurt. I accept the parts of myself that want to believe in the best in people and may excuse their harmful behavior. And I'm worthy of love and compassion. And those positive self-affirmations come from some of the books that I've cited earlier today. And I give many more examples of that. So, for instance, write this down and put it in your wallet, or write it down and pin it on one of your boards that you may have in your office. Those things can really help, particularly when you feel down. Also, learn to be assertive. And you may have heard that being assertive is not the same as being passive or passive-aggressive or aggressive. So, for example, a passive person is a person who's not able to say no, who avoid conflicts, who let others take advantage of them, who feel like a victim. Because mildly passive-aggressive people are not aware that they're angry, and they may be thinking about revenge, may feel resentful, may be unhappy. And actively passive-aggressive people may deny that they're angry, but also act out on that, for instance, via sarcasm, planning revenge, and trying to get back in secret. And an aggressive person who's actually starting to hurt others, raising the voice, physically aggressive, having angry outbursts. So when you recognize any of this behavior inside yourself, that may be a very understandable response that may be triggered by the narcissist. And this is not saying that you don't have the right to feel how you feel. Now, the opposite is true. Being assertive is recognizing at a very early point onwards what your rights are. I personally found the personal Bill of Rights very helpful. And this was developed by some people in the 70s and 80s. And this can be helpful to write this down for yourself, put it in your wallet, pin it on your board, etc. To tell yourself, I have the right to ask for what I want. I have the right to say no to requests or demands I can't or do not want to meet. I have the right to express all my feelings. I can change my mind. I can make mistakes, and I don't need to be perfect. I can follow my own values and standards. I have the right to say no to anything that I feel that I'm not ready to do or that values my rights. I have the right to determine my own priorities. I'm not responsible for others. I have the right to expect honesty from others. I have the right to feel angry at someone I love. That's an important one for a lot of people, because anger is not necessarily always bad, as long as it's proportionate and realistic. I have the right to be uniquely myself, not being manipulated by, for instance, narcissists. I have the right to feel scared. I have the right to feel scared and say I'm scared. I have the right to say I don't know. I have the right to not to give excuses or reasons for my behavior. I have the right to make decisions based on my feelings. I have the right to my own needs for personal space and time. I have the right to be playful and frivolous. I have the right to be healthier than people around me. I have the right to be not abused. Very important one. I have the right to make friends and be comfortable around my own people, which also includes like having my own hobbies and having my own evenings for myself, and also checking my own reality. I have the right to change and grow. I have the right to have my own needs and wants respected by others. I have the right to be treated with dignity and respect, and I have the right to be happy. So this is very important. Remind yourself, these are your rights. You deserve that your rights are respected, both by others as well as by yourself. And it may help to read this aloud for yourself several times until you really start believing it. Remind yourself of this. Read this aloud several times over time. So this is what I wanted to speak with you about today. thank you very much for listening. I wish you a lot of wisdom and strength, and particularly a lot of self-compassion in your journey of coping and healing from interactions with narcissists. And this is a presentation that I've given as part of the IMEC International Meeting Events and Community, meaningthetalk.uk. And with our events, you'll find inspiration and community for living a meaningful life, because we believe that everybody deserves to live a meaningful life. That means meaningful life that you decide and that you have developed. That is not prescribed by others, by narcissists, by narcissistic leaders. No, it's about discover for yourself what's meaningful for you. And to be able to live a meaningful life, to be able to have a sense of fulfillment in your life, you may first need to understand those mechanisms of narcissism, of human magnet syndrome. And I've seen it a lot in my work as a psychotherapist and as a researcher, that people can struggle with not feeling that they live a meaningful life because they follow the meanings of the narcissists, or they are avoiding their own kind of existential crisis, or they're avoiding their sense of meaninglessness in life. And instead of that, they clamp themselves onto the narcissists. And sometimes people need to first learn to let go of narcissists, of their narcissistic relationships, of their abuse. And yes, it can be frightening and threatening to some extent to look into those existential questions like, how can I live a meaningful life? But it's a journey that's so worthwhile, so valuable, because you deserve to live your meaningful life, because your meanings matter. You're a worthy person. You're an important person. And you have the right to follow your own meaning in life. You can. So you may find some other source of inspiration at IMEC. We organize training. We have several trainings coming up very soon. We also have a monthly self-development group, which in the past we called that a social support group, which is for free, by the way. We also organize frequent conferences. We organize books and publications, and we have a full community around. So please join us, for instance, in the monthly groups, last Wednesday of the month. We also have groups to discover your own meaning in life, learn how to make decisions, enjoy and live your life to the fullest. That's later in May or June. And also, if you want as a professional to help others live a more meaningful life, we have an evidence-based meaning center practitioner certificate to learn how to effectively help clients live a meaningful life. Further, I'm giving several trainings and lectures online. You may see that on my personal website, joelvos.com, such as giving training on working with meaning in cognitive behavior therapy at the Albert Ellis Institute. And finally, and I can't tell you enough how much I actually hate all this self-promotion, but as an academic, hey, I really hope to spread a little bit of my expertise, a little bit of my wisdom with others. With saying that obviously this is the only thing that is around there, but hopefully it may inspire some people. I've written a self-help book called 50 Pictures of Living a Meaningful Life, which is kind of a self-help book with a lot of pictures that I've created. Then there's my handbook on meaning in life, an evidence-based handbook for practitioners, which summarizes the full research field on how to live a meaningful life. Then a book on the politics and economics of meaning in life, how our economic system influences what we think is meaningful. Then my bestseller during the COVID-19 pandemic is about psychology of COVID-19, understanding the impact it has on our lives. Then there's also the book Mental Health in Crisis, which tells about problems in the mental health system, but also how our society creates a lot of our mental health issues. And then some more books are coming up about facing COVID-19 and beyond, and the step-by-step guide to doing research, psychological therapies. You can read more on joelvos.com and on the International Meeting Events Community on meaning.org.uk. So again, I really wish you a lot of wisdom, strength, and self-compassion on your journey of dealing with narcissists and healing from them. And I hope to see you at one of our events. Thank you.